I am David Nolan, a long past president of the Marjorie Canaan Rawlings Society, and one of my long-held ambitions is about to become true this morning. Our special guest is my friend Sally Baskin Hooker. You know, we have heard from the archivists who have preserved Marjorie's papers and from historians commenting about Marjorie's role not only in literature but in history in Florida. And we heard from her most recent biographer, and if you have not gotten a copy of Anne McCutcheon's book, I understand there are 3 more yet to go out in the lobby, so be sure and grab it and get it autographed. But now you get to hear from somebody who knew Marjorie Rawlings, and not only that, but from her niece, Sally Baskin Hooker. Sally lives in Trenton, Florida, and before that she lived in St. Augustine, and she grew up in a place that was always reported in the newspapers as the smallest municipality in Florida. So small you didn't even have to live there to vote, you just had to work there, because it was the Walt Disney World of its day. So Sally, without further ado, why don't you tell us how you wound up in Florida?
Well, first, can you all hear me? Yes. I can talk without the microphone.
No.
Okay. I have a very good name. It's Sarah Janice Baskin Hooker. When I was born, my dad called up to Alabama to his 2 sisters, Uncle Norton and my dad Tom's sisters, and said, Sarah Janice Baskin has arrived. Well, the one sister said, poor Sally B. And that was the last I heard of Sarah Janice, until probably the night that I graduated from high school, and the principal called my name 4 times. Well, I was up there waving at my mom and my present boyfriend, and finally in a booming voice he hollered out, Sally B, get over here and get your diploma. I was born in 1942 in Ocala, Florida. My parents had moved there in 1939 at the request and suggestion of Norton Baskin. There was a little motor court, McKay's Motor Court, on Silver Springs Boulevard. It consisted of a lot of little cottages, orange groves, grapefruit groves. But being that it was 1942 and tourists were down, they decided to turn it over to West Point cadets who were getting their wings in Dunellen. So all of a sudden my mother became a house mother to West Point cadets. Well, I was born in 1942, as I said, and I was the darling because they all sort of adopted me and babysat me. When the young men would earn their wings in Dunellen, much to the disgrace and everything of their officers, they would come over the cottages and dip their wings to let my mother know that they had gotten their wings. That's how I got to Florida. I'm one of those rare natives.
And how did you get then to Marineland?
Well, that is a big story. Marineland, I have to give you a little brief history. Marineland was the vision of a group of men that wanted to build an area where they could do filming, documentaries, and study marine life in an enclosed area. It took several years to procure the land, but they found a piece of property 18 miles south of St. Augustine that had the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the Intercoastal Waterway on the other. So they started building the aquarium and the tanks. Well, that became an engineering and construction marvel, because not only did they build it in 1 year, but at a cost of $500,000. A lot of things came out of that. One of the big ones was a paint that could be underwater, and the Navy used that for their battleships. When Marineland was when they were opening it, this group of men realized that there were a lot of people riding by. So they said, let's charge $1 and see if anybody will come. Well, the first day, A1A, which was a narrow little 2-lane road, had over 30,000 people on it. They said the car stretched almost to Crescent Beach. And they said, aha, we think we've got something here. So they had built a restaurant, the Dolphin Restaurant. They built a motel that had an outdoor bowling alley. They built a little snack shop, the Periwinkle, and we love to call it the Pennywinkle. And they had a service station which could pump gas because they were 18 miles away from town. When World War II started out, they had to close down Marine Studios because it was on the coast and there was a lot of submarine activity. So it was turned over to the Coast Guard as a beach walking training area for dogs and for the Coast Guard. And so that's what they did during the wartime. Well, after the war was over, they opened it back up, and here they had a motel, a hotel, a restaurant, a little snack bar, and they had to find someone to manage it. Well, there was this man, Norton Baskin, at the Castle Warden in St. Augustine. And they went to him and they said, we'd like for you to come down and look around and see if you'd be interested in being the manager. Well, he went down and he realized it was more than what he wanted to undertake. And he told him, he said, I have a brother over in Ocala that maybe he could come over and interview. So my dad came and interviewed. They said, oh yes, this is wonderful. And he said, now I must warn you, I have a 3-year-old daughter. Oh, that's no problem. Little did they know. I became the only child raised at Marineland from 1946 until 1960. And that's how I got to Marineland.
And what early memories do you have of your Uncle Norton and your Aunt Marjorie?
Well, my Aunt Marjorie, I visited her several times at Cross Creek. And the other day when we did our tour, when I saw the sidewalk leading from the gate, I sort of cringed. Because at that time, each side of the sidewalk was sand spurs. And after a very long trip from Marineland, which meant we had to come through Hastings and Palatka and down the road, and most of it was brick, very uneven, and it was just, you know, being a child, I was very fidgety. And my dad would promise me, okay, we're going to go across the Clackety Bridge, which you all know about the bridge where everybody met to solve their problems, and we're going to go through the tunnel, which was the trees that had grown over together, and we'll be there at the house. Well, I would be so excited, and I would run through the gate, and guess what I got into? Sand spurs. So poor Aunt Marjorie was greeted with me screaming bloody murder, and she would come and take my hand and holler into Idella, get this child a cookie or an orange or something. I've got to pull these things out of her clothes. So I would sit on the top step, and if you all visited the other day, you know what I'm talking about, and she would take a wet towel and she would slowly take the sand spurs out of my clothes. My impression of Aunt Marjorie, she was wonderful. I mean, I just thought she was wonderful, and I loved her house, and I especially loved her red velvet couch, fainting couch as they called it, because that's where they would put me down for my naps while they would play cards. My other relationship with Aunt Marjorie was at Crescent Beach, and it was up in the beach house, and I would go back in her room on Sunday morning because after church my dad would allow me to go get her a New York Times and a little bouquet of flowers. There was a little newsstand there right where Potter's Wax Museum we used to be. And I would go and I would crawl up into this fantastic bed, which was like crawling up into a cloud. She probably had one of the first king-size beds that I had ever seen, and I'm sure it was custom made. She would say, oh, well, if you're gonna come up here, you've got to get dressed up. And she would let me go get a silk bed jacket and her Malibu bedroom slippers. Now, sure all of y'all know what I'm talking about. They were silken bedroom slippers with little feathers on the toes of them. And we would sit up in bed and talk trash and swap lies. And I was told that I had a vivid imagination, and she loved to get me started on stories. And I would just get so out of breath, and she said, well, what happened next? Oh, the crab bit its toe, and that was the end of it. So I have very good memories of crawling up in that fantastic cloud of a bed. In my adult life, I realized that Aunt Marjorie was not well, and this was probably a time when she was having to rest and recuperate. Idella would bring in her breakfast tray, and I thought, oh, this is the life. This is what I want to live. We did have a very good relationship. Being an only child, there were times when a friend of hers, Edith Pope, would take her daughter to mother-daughter activities. That was a big thing back in the 40s, early 50s. Well, Aunt Marjorie didn't have any children, so my mother would get a call. I'm gonna come and pick up Sally, and we're gonna go do this or that. And so we had great adventures. One of the first ones was going to the circus. She decided I need to go to the circus. I had never had cotton candy before. And much to her distress, she found out I didn't know what to do with cotton candy because we both came home a big sticky mess.
What was it like to grow up in a tourist attraction?
Well, I was an only child. I was in everything. If there was something going on, I was always in the background, or I was asking questions, and there were times when, well, I have to explain about the motel that I lived in. There was nothing between St. Augustine Beach and Flagler Beach of any size where people could stay. The motel had quite a few rooms, so people would stay there if they were making a movie or a documentary or writing stories. And a lot of times they would need a background person for a photograph. And you can see on the poster, I work cheap. Double-decker ice cream. As I got older, I got a little bit better. I needed a new bathing suit. But yes, I was always, it seemed like in the middle of everything. I don't want to say I had free range of marine studios, but I was there every day doing something.
And now the most famous of the dolphins there was named for our longtime Rawlings Society trustee's mother, Shirley Thompson's mother.
Yes.
And what are your memories of this famous dolphin, Nellie?
In 1952, a dolphin was born, and I have to kind of do a little background. My mother was a registered nurse, and they knew this, and whenever there was a baby dolphin going to be born, they would call my mother up, even if it was midnight, and say, oh, Mildred, you need to come up. You know, we need you help for the delivery. Now here's my mother looking through a double pane porthole with tons and tons and gallons of water between her and the dolphin. But she worked up a chart where she could do transitions, she could do the different contractions, she would describe, and I'm sure that somewhere in their archives there is my mother's reports of the baby dolphin. But Nellie was born, and as David said, she was named after Nellie Mae Neighbors, which is Shirley Thompson's mother. Nellie was in the circular tank as one of the regular dolphins, and then soon she was taken back to what they call the stadium tank, where the dolphins did different tricks. Well, at night, I would go up. I had a certain little way of patting on the side of the tank. Nellie would come up, and I would dive in and do laps with her. So I grew up with Nellie. In my preteen and teen years, she heard all my secrets. I mean, I would just tell her about bad boyfriends, bad things my mama had done to me. And so Nellie and I became very good friends. And as on the poster, you'll see a picture of Nellie and me. I was probably about 16 there.
And she remembered you.
And she remembered me, yes. Even on her, I've forgotten, her 60th something birthday, they said, oh, you know, pat the tank. And I said, no, I don't want to take away from them. Well, I got away from everybody else, and I patted the tank. And my husband has pictures of her coming, and she looked at me, and she looked at me, and then finally she said, yeah, I know you, I know you. So they do remember.
And do you remember some of the movies they made at Marineland when you were growing up?
Well, the biggest one was Revenge of the Creature. It was the second film after The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Once again, old Sally was right there in the background. I had to get a Social Security card because I was an extra, and I got $10 to be a crowd scene. If you ever see the movie, I'm the little girl right before the little girl falls over the ropes. That's my only claim to fame on that. So yes, there were many films and documentaries made at Marineland.
And did you cross paths with any famous authors besides your Aunt Marjorie?
Well, yes. Aunt Marjorie liked to entertain at the Dolphin Restaurant. And once again, she would call my mother up and she'd say, can you clean Sally up? Which meant get me off the beach and out of a bathing suit. Well, Mama would put me in a cute little dress and I would walk up to the restaurant, and I had been groomed in my Southern manners. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, thank you, ma'am, please. I knew how to shake hands and curtsy, and so she would take me into the dining room. Well, one of them was this grizzly beard man, and I'm told it was Ernest Hemingway. Didn't mean a thing to me. Another time, there was a lady with a really funny hat on, Eleanor Roosevelt. But then one time, and it was not a famous author, and why to this day I do not know, they wanted me to meet her. But I walked in, and here was a woman with diamonds on every finger, tall, beautiful, fur jacket, and I just thought, this is who I want to be. This is my future. Well, it turned out to be Sally Rand the stripper. And I really don't know why I was called up there, other than they thought I would enjoy it.
Now, you talked about getting in trouble because you knew something about a famous author who was visiting.
When I was in the 8th grade, Thornton Wilder came to St. Augustine, and he was staying at the Ponce de Leon Hotel, and he was there to write. Well, he couldn't get anything done because all the little ladies in town were brunching and lunching him and teaing him. And he finally went to the manager there at Ponce de Leon Hotel. He said, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to check out because I can't get anything done. And he said, well, Mr. Wilder, what's the problem? He said, well, he explained to him, and he said, what are you looking for? He said, I need somewhere quiet, relaxed, you know, where I can write. So he said, I know exactly where you need to go. And he called my mother up and he explained the situation. And he said, now he's got to be able to leave messages, take messages, have them passed on. She said, not a problem. Well, this gentleman came down. My mother said, his name is Thornton Wilder. How do you do? I'm glad to meet you. And every day when I got off the bus, I had an hour on the beach. And Mr. Wilder and I would walk the beach, we'd pick up shells, we talked. I still did not realize who he was. And probably about a week after he left Marineland, my teacher got up and she said, oh, class, we have had the most wonderful thing happen here in St. Augustine. We had a famous author staying at the Ponce de Leon Hotel, Thornton Wilder. Well, guess whose hand went up? And she said, yes, Sally. I said, no, he's been staying at my house the last 2 weeks. Well, my house was the motel. The note was sent home to my mother. And my mother came in. Now, 18 miles doesn't sound like very far right now, but back then it was almost a half a day trip to go in. I mean, it took her away from the motel. And the teacher got up in her face, which is not something to do. And she said, your daughter is the biggest storyteller. She had the audacity to get up in front of the class and say that Thornton Wilder had been staying at her house. And she said, and? She said, but he's been at the, she said, no. He has been down at Marineland writing for the last 2 weeks. And yes, Sally and Mr. Wilder walked on the beach in the afternoon, picked up shells, and what is the problem? Well, needless to say, the rest of my school year was not real comfortable.
Now, Marjorie once said that one of the most disillusioning experiences she had was when she met the grandson of the great novelist Leo Tolstoy, and he told her he couldn't write. Do you have memories of Ilya Tolstoy at Marineland?
Yes, he was one of the men who were the original men that wanted to build the aquarium. Yes, he, along with another group of very wealthy men.
And how, do you remember when you first saw the Yearling movie?
I saw it at the Matanzas Theater. I cried. I didn't understand, what was going on. I just realized that the deer was not going to make it, and I kept watching it over and over again after that to see if maybe he would make it, but he never did. So yes, I remember the Yearling.
And did you introduce your children to the movie as well?
Yes, they grew up with stories of Aunt Marjorie and the Yearling and her writings, and they've all, all the books have all been passed down to them.
And do you remember Marjorie's last days? What are your memories there?
Aunt Marjorie was on her way to O&D Young, who lived at Washington Oaks, south of Marineland. She was going down to play cards. She stopped by the motel because my mother had had surgery, and she brought her a silken gown. They were in the room and back in the bedroom talking for probably about an hour. And when she came out, she said, Sally, climb into the car with me. And I said, yes, ma'am. So I got in the back of the car, and she hugged me, and she said, Sally, take care of your mother. Mothers are very precious people. She left, and I remember my mother saying that, they talked about a very bad headache that she was having. Probably about 3 days later, she was in Flagler Hospital. She had a massive cerebral hemorrhage. At the time, my uncle had been to visit her, and he told her, he said, I have to get back to Marineland. And they think that he was possibly on the top of the Bridge of Lions in St. Augustine, heading back down to Marineland when she passed. That's a Southern thing. When you talk about someone passing, you have to dip your head. It's just a sign of respect, so if you see me do this. Yes, I do remember. I was not allowed to go to her services, but I heard all about it. And I don't know if many of you know that at her services, a woman sang, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. And that has always been so important to me, because it's just like a memory of my Aunt Marjorie.
Now, your Uncle Norton survived Marjorie by 44 years. What was that long widowhood like?
Of course, he was devastated, when she passed. I forgot. And But I think that his goal in life was to continue her legacy, to talk about her, and he was reluctant. He didn't like to talk in crowds. But once he got up and started talking, I wonder where I got that from, but he would talk forever because he truly loved her. So many stories have been written, but they had a certain marriage that probably a lot of people wouldn't understand, but I understood. I understood that there were times when she had to be away because that was the only way she was able to write.
And now Norton helped you with your own wedding, right?
Yes, he did. When my husband and I were getting ready to get married, we went around to various churches, and at the time it just didn't work out. And so we went to Uncle Norton, who, would listen to us moan and groan. And he said, "It's no problem. You'll get married here at the house." And I said, "On Dolphin Drive." And the house had a very nice staircase. And he said, "The reason is I want to see one more bride come down a staircase." And that goes back to when he was at the Castle Warden. There were a lot of war brides that he would make sure they had a reception or a light dinner. And he said he always thrilled to watch them come down and to get their wedding ceremony down the steps. And so we arranged it where we were watching the sun go down in the afternoon at his house on Dolphin Drive. And he made arrangements for the whole thing. He bought the food. We were told by the minister that we could not have alcoholic beverages in the house. Well, if you knew my Uncle Norton, that was going to be a challenge. So my bride's book was on one credenza. There was a bouquet of flowers on another credenza. And there was a whole case of champagne out in the garage on ice. So when the Reverend left, Uncle Norton got in the middle of the place and said, "Okay, bar's open." There went the bride's book, and there went the bouquet of flowers. And after a while, he came up and patted Jim on the shoulder, and he said, "Don't y'all have something to do?" And we said, "Well, yeah, we're going to Daytona on a honeymoon." He said, "Well, then I suggest you get started." What we didn't realize was he had a party planned afterwards because he had food and he had champagne. So.
Now, Norton, in that long widowerhood, moved from Crescent Beach to the magnificent house on Dolphin Drive overlooking downtown St. Augustine, and finally to Ponte Vedra Retirement Community. What's the story behind those?
Well, he lived at Crescent Beach all those years. And he would say, sometimes people would come off the beach, "Can we please use your bathroom?" But that was about the only time that, his house was invaded. Well, within a 2-week period, he was robbed twice. First time, he was not there. I mean, he came upon it, and they took off. Second time, they strong-armed him, put him in a bathroom, and it just happened that Jim had come down to the motel there at Marineland, and he told my mom and dad, my dad said, "I really need to go check on Norton." So he drove up to the Crescent Beach house, and he always would flash the lights because the house sat up on a sand dune, and he could see movement up there. And he honked the horn when they took off, dropping bags of silver and, treasures and all on the sand dunes. And my dad got up there and they let him out of the bathroom. Well, after a while, we went into St. Augustine to fill out the police report, and in walked these men who had robbed him. And he looked up and he dipped his head. He said, "That's the ones that robbed me." So they had gone to a little cafe to try to establish an excuse. They beat up somebody at this little cafe. And so that's when he decided he would move in. My husband came. He stayed with Uncle Norton until he was going to Europe with his best friends, the Driscolls. And he left Jim in charge of the house on Dolphin Drive. because he said he had an interior decorator coming. Well, the interior decorator came into this beautiful home and was putting little flower wallpaper up in pastel colors. And he called Jim and he said, "How's it going?" Jim said, "Uncle Norton, I hate to tell you, but she's doing, these different things." He said, "I'm gonna fire her. You stay there at the house and make sure I get the right thing." And so he did. He made it more of a man's home.
And do you have memories of the Cross Creek movie, which came out towards Norton's later life?
Uncle Norton was thrilled by it. He loved telling the stories, and he had a lot to do with, making sure the story was true. A lot of the things were true. But the biggest thing was when Peter Coyote, who played him in the movie, walked in to see Uncle Norton. Well, my uncle was about probably 5'7". Peter Coyote was over 6 foot. And I can remember Uncle Norton saying, he walked in and he looked and he looked and he looked and he said, "Oh, I always wanted to be 6 feet tall." So they had a very good relationship. Then he met Mary Steenburgen and fell in love with her. And he said, "I can see a little of Marge in her." They finally asked him if he'd like to be an extra in the movie. He said, "What would I play?" They said, "Well, a little old man sitting on the porch." And he said, "Well, sure." So they came for him in a limousine, took him to the makeup trailer. He sat up in the thing, and the lady she did this, and she took a hat and kind of put it cockeyed, and she said, "Okay, Mr. Baskin, you're finished." He said, "Finished? I thought you were gonna make me a little old man." She said, "Oh, Mr. Baskin, you are a little old man." So when you see him in there, that's the story.
And what did Norton tell you and yours about your importance to the life of Marjorie Rawlings?
When I was 12 years old, a year after Aunt Marjorie had passed away, Uncle Norton called all the nieces and nephews up onto the porch at Crescent Beach. Now, I was 12 years old. My cousins, a lot of them were older. They were probably 20 years older than me. My dad was born when my grandmother was 42. So all of the other children were older. He sat us down, and I remember he, had this toddy in his hand. So it was probably late in the afternoon. And he said, "I want to tell you all one thing. Marjorie Canaan Rawlings was your aunt. That is your only claim to fame. You did not contribute to her writing. She did not write about you, and you do not need to benefit from anything." I do not know the story behind that, but that's when I decided, I'm not going to go out and brag. If people ask me, I say, "Yes, she was." Okay. Then somebody next to me came along. In 1997, when my Uncle Norton passed away, I went down to the funeral home, and I wanted to know what the plans were. And the funeral director said, "Okay, he's left directions that there will be no singing, no praying, nothing religious. He wants his friends to get up and talk about him. Mike Gannon, all the," and I said, "You mean there's nothing about the family?" He said, "No, but if you want to give the eulogy, please feel welcome to do it." Well, here I am going over to Antioch, briefly writing down little notes and stuff. And it came my time, and I stood at the end of the casket. What I said, I don't know. But then this gentleman came up to me. His name is David Nolan. And he said, "Oh, Sally, you have got to talk at one of our meetings, MKR meetings." And I said, I don't talk. I mean, I talk, but I don't do speeches. He said, but you're a novelty. And I said, "Mr. Nolan, a novelty is something you put on a shelf and dusted every 5 years. And he said, no, no, no. You had a personal relationship with Marjorie Canaan Rawlings. You had firsthand information about Marine Studios and Marine Land. He said, you need to talk. Well, guess who was at the next meeting talking? And that's how this all started.
Well, I am so glad to have met you at the sad occasion of Norton's funeral. And since then, you have become one of the longest serving trustees of the Rawlings Society. And not only you, but your daughter Ginger Maurer, who was manning the booth out there for the silent auction today, and your husband, Jim Hooker, who for years took the best photographs ever taken of our annual meetings. But you brought a little souvenir of Marjorie with you
Yes.
today.
This is her fur jacket. And as I said, whenever she would go to have a meeting or a talk or something, Owen D. Young made sure that she had a spray of orchids. It was not a one single orchid. It was like that. And she would always come back by the motel to show it off to me because she knew how much I love flowers. The hat, I can't guarantee that it's probably around her time, but it's not her hat. There's one more little story I'd like to tell. He asked what my relationship with Aunt Marjorie was. She would borrow me because there would be these mother-daughter. And I was convenient, and I guess she thought, well, I knew good manners. So there was one that was going to be a mother and daughter luncheon at a big hotel there in St. Augustine. And she must have had plenty of time to plan this because she came down to Marine Land and she had this big box with a pink bow on top. And I thought, oh, I'm finally getting my mink coat. Too many movies, right? Well, we opened it up, and in there was a green velvet dress with Irish lace collar and sleeves. And of course, there was always shoes and socks and a purse and gloves because she made sure of that. Well, we went out to lunch, and I'm sitting there. Oh, I had never seen velvet before. And if you know velvet, if you do it this way, it's one color. If you do it this way, it's another color. You can write your name in it. So I'm sitting there playing. Well, in this very soft but permanent voice, she says, Sally B, stop petting your dress. Yes, ma'am. Hands folded in the lap. So on the poster, you will see me with my green velvet dress, which my mother gave away sometime. The top picture was probably 1947 when we came to visit the Cross Creek House. And then others will explain. And you can see me as my double dip ice cream model.
And you can see Marjorie wearing the fur
And
coat
Marjorie,
there on the SS
they were taking
United
a
States.
cruise to Europe, and she's got on the same fur jacket.
Well, thank you so much, Sally. This has really been something I've looked forward to for years.
There's another whole hour we can talk, but
And thank you to the Florida Historical Society and the Marjorie Canaan Rawlings Society for bringing you this entire program we've been in the last few days. I can't imagine how it will be improved on, but Ben Brokemarker will figure out next year.
Well, what a perfect way to end our sessions. There's still one more thing to do. As you go out the doors, right across the hall, well, they're bag lunches, not box lunches, but if you have get out your little card in your, it's the last one where the other 2 meal tickets were, and there'll be help over there to find the right bag for you. And then you'll be going on your own to the Matheson Museum, where there are places inside to eat if it's raining, and even if it's not raining, you can eat your lunch inside the Matheson. If you're from out of town, as many of us are, and you don't know exactly how to get there, there are some maps at the registration desk as well. So, thank you all for being here.